Good afternoon. I'm Leon Davis. I want to thank you for joining me. This is Altitude Adjustment. On March the 15th of this year, Tony Robbins was giving one of his motivational seminars. He took a moment to speak about the Me Too movement, and it probably didn't go as he originally had planned. Actually, the whole event was a kind of microcosm of corporate America. When I talk about corporate culture, and I'm speaking about specifically the behavior that is displayed by management and allowed to exist inside of a company. Robbins, who is hired by companies to give his seminars, his positive message of empowerment, self-help, and motivation to employees, is part of helping set a company's expectations of its employees, and it impacts the culture of that organization, thus the corporate culture. Now, Robbins' actions regarding the Me Too movement reflect on the mindset and attitude that he brings to those organizations when he is called on. Welcome to Altitude Adjustment. So, I took some clips from this encounter, and you may or may not have be familiar with the encounter or watch the video of his interactions with Nanine. So let me start by saying that I don't follow Tony Robbins very closely, so my observations are probably cursory at best. The first clip, or the first video, kind of sets the tone for the topic that I'm talking about. Now, Robbins' initial comments were not captured on the video, so it picks up where Nanine gave back her rebuttal to Robbins. Let's get that started.
I think you misunderstand the Me Too movement. I think the Me
Not for you personally. I'm not misunderstanding for you. You can educate for me. I'm telling you, I've read these because my life is about helping people have new choices. So when I see them, I've read so many, thousands. Have you read thousands? Or are you going to tell me what your experience of the Me Too movement is? Because I respect all of you. You can use the Me Too movement to be such a beautiful thing. I'm not knocking the Me Too movement. I'm knocking victimhood. Raise your hand if you follow that. And I'm not suggesting you have to agree with me. I'm just suggesting you consider what its impact is. Look at these people and see what is empowerment. Anger is not empowerment. What you're seeing is people making themselves significant by making somebody else wrong and getting certainty. And there's nothing wrong with that, it just won't make you happy.
Okay, so one of the first things that I noticed about the clip was his use of intimidation. He spoke about his wealth of knowledge and his experience versus her feelings and experience. So he, by a preponderance of what he knows and what he's learned and what he shared, he tries to make her point seem less focused or as intense as his. He asserts that that the women are trying to make themselves happy rather than referring to them as creating a level playing field. Now, usually a movement starts after someone or some group has tried to use logic, reason, or a less aggressive avenue to affect change, and they failed. Then maybe anger and frustration, or what seems to be left to them, is how they try to affect change. Now, asserting that the movement is about anger and self-gratification completely overlooks how things got to that point. The object of the protest always, in my opinion, should be investigated for any culpability in the reason for the protest. Now, he confronts the impact of the Me Too movement without confronting the impact of corporate and individual behavior, which has brought about the Me Too movement. He states that he sees the movement as a weapon and not as a defense response. So when I talk about the looking at the object of the protest as culpable, I wanted to use this analogy like a teacher in a classroom. A teacher has her back to the classroom and maybe writing some instructions, and the teacher turns around and notices that one student strikes another student, then acts as though that student maybe initiated the situation, not realizing that the student that they saw strike the other student was actually acting in defense, in self-defense. And the person who was caught during the striking is then treated as the offender. Now, is there some culpability in that? Well, if you strike back, yes, depending on the situation. But in this particular movement, the striking back is more of a tool to affect change than it is actually trying to cause harm or danger to the whole industry. The goal is to make sure that every individual has an opportunity to participate, to be treated fairly, and to achieve their full potential, because we know that that a lot of people are not being allowed to reach their full potential. Now, he also refers to some in the Me Too movement as attempting to make other people wrong. Now, what I say is, if you do something wrong, if you do something that is wrong, aren't you wrong? And shouldn't you be called on that? And though he's making the argument that they're trying to make someone else, they're trying to make themselves feel better by making someone else wrong. If the other person is wrong, if they're doing something that they need to be called on, you can't fault the person who's trying to get the other person to recognize that their behavior is detrimental by saying you're doing it to make someone else wrong. They're doing it to highlight what is wrong in the first place, and that can't be wrong in and of itself. So you can't be wrong to correct a wrong. I'm going to share this next video. Let's see.
It won't make them better, it won't make you better. And oh, by the way, what did Jesus say, regardless of what religious belief? You shouldn't be anybody, you don't have to be Jesus. But who should throw the stone?
He who has not sinned.
You shouldn't do that stone if you live in a fucking glass house. Is there any one of us that hasn't done something that we prefer we'd not, or that we're embarrassed by, or was hurtful even we didn't mean it to? Who here has never done anything of that nature in your life? Raise your hand. One liar. Thank you. So I'm not knocking the Me Too movement. I'm knocking victimhood. If you use the Me Too movement to try to get significance and certainty by attacking and destroying someone else, you haven't grown an ounce. All you've done is basically use a drug called significance to make yourself feel good. Or certainty. Raise your hand if you see this. Question or comment?
So my comment is that I hear you mischaracterizing the Me Too movement. Certainly.
Okay, I'm going to stop that, and I'll come back to the rest of that. So he makes the argument that, or he tries to make the argument that if you've never done anything wrong, then you can speak up. And what that does is, if we all, I think most people get it. It's pretty obvious that that we are flawed human beings, and that we do have some things that we can always look back and believe that we can improve upon. And if we only speak up when we don't feel like we have anything that we can improve upon, no one would ever speak up. No one would ever challenge any wrongs, because we've all been wrong at some point, or we've all had something that we can look back at it and say, I didn't do my best there and I could do better. But that doesn't negate being able to speak up, because identifying, and I always like to say, see something, say something. If you see something wrong, because you are wrong does not mean you should not speak up. That doesn't, two wrongs don't make a right. So allowing another wrong because you've been wrong isn't going to make it right. So I thought that was pretty unfair to even bring up that way, and I felt it was another tactic, a bullying tactic. So there were a couple of bullying tactics exhibited in the videos so far, and so with our current environment of trying to fight against bullying and things like that, I don't know if he was using that as a way to highlight what bullying is, or if he is really like that, if he's really bullying, a bullying type person. As I said, I don't follow him on a regular basis. I've seen several of his videos before, and I found a lot of the information that he provides very good. But in this particular instance, I didn't find that the information that was being provided was exceptionally helpful, or creating a better environment, helping us move forward. And I've got a little bit more on that coming up. So let me share this. This is the last video. I won't bore you with the whole thing, but I do want to finish with her making her point. She spoke up in opposition to, or explaining her side of what she saw his behavior as, and then he performed a little exercise, and I think, and I've heard a lot, or that he was attacked a lot for that, and he apologized, and he apologized to this woman who started the Me Too movement. But let me get this video started for you real quick, and then we'll finish up.
You're using it differently than some other people. What I'm suggesting to you is it's easy to see when a person gets angry and attacks. Rarely, watch this. Come over here. Yes, please. Watch. Put out your fist. Why are you pushing back? I didn't tell you to push back. Why are you pushing back? Why are you pushing so hard? So you're telling me that the harder I push, the more you're going to comply and I'm going to be safe.
Well, Chopra says don't resist.
I don't give a fuck what Chopra says. I know, Mr. Chopra. This has nothing to do with it. You're still resisting. She's still pushing on me. I've pointed out she's still pushing on me. Why is she still pushing? And when you push someone else, it doesn't make you more safe. It just makes them angry.
But it's awareness, it's not pushing.
In Hollywood, where most of this is the most intense, I have so many clients there. And I talk to men all the time, and it breaks my heart for women, not for men. Because I just with someone the other day, very famous man, very powerful man, who's saying how stressed he is because he interviewed 3 people that day. One was a woman, 2 were men. The woman was better qualified, but she was very attractive, and he knew I can't have her around because it's too big a risk, and he hired somebody else. I've had a dozen men tell me this. So I want you to know, I'm not telling you what to do. No, you're giving me an excuse. You're telling me that the more I push, the more I'm going to be safe. Is it true? It's not. Listen to me. There are plenty of women in this room, and plenty will have a different point of view. I'm not asking you to take my point of view. I'm asking you to consider how you use anything, technology.
Okay. Hopefully you were able to hear all of that. I know it was a little, the video wasn't that great. But I cut off the earlier video where she explained that she felt that he was misrepresenting the U2 movement. But that was how that exercise started, with the pushing. Now, he acknowledges that she's using the movement differently than what he had laid out. That should have then nullified the argument that it was a movement based on anger and emotion, but it didn't, because he continued to emphasize his particular view and talking about the victimhood, which is one of the things that he rails against. I don't want to call it rails, but he teaches against. My thought is that he should have quickly acknowledged that there are the two sides to the arguments and giving hers a little bit more weight, because it was important to understanding the argument, to show that he realized what she was saying was in some point factual. He didn't do that. So he then begins this demonstration, and he uses pushing her and explaining that pushing or resisting does not make her safer. Now, I am in absolute and total disagreement with him on this one. First, he was pushing her and pointed out that she was pushing back. That's a basic tenet of self-defense. It's a self-defense mechanism because she didn't trust him. It is natural that she wouldn't trust him. She didn't know what he was trying to accomplish. He didn't tell her or give her any warning about what he was going to do. And so she reacted in what any responsible person would have done. It is a complete self-defense mechanism, so that you try to protect yourself in a situation where you could possibly end up injured or unsafe in other ways, and you just do it naturally. So it wasn't that she was trying to push back against him because she was angry or there were some emotional tenets involved in it. It was strictly a self-defense mechanism, which anybody would have done. So that I don't know if that demonstration really was useful in driving home the idea that not pushing back or pushing back or resisting or pushing has anything to do with the whole Me Too movement. Her resistance, though it may not have been completely or may not have completely stunted his advances, it does allow her some options on how to protect herself, and it gives her more of a sure footing. So if you take that into not just the physical world in this demonstration, but in the business world and in the Me Too movement, when you are under attack or under siege, as the Me Too movement feels that they are, and they're fighting back so that they can maintain a level of stability to either recover or to create some alternate force to blunt, stunt, or stop advances that are not benefiting them. The Me Too movement may seem like an attack, but I believe women have lost so much ground that they feel they have to fight back to maintain sure footing so that they don't continue to lose ground. It is not necessarily an attack or an attempt to assert, but an attempt to assert what is right and proper. They could either fight back or they can continue to walk backwards and continue to lose ground until the offending force either abates itself or determines that it has achieved its objectives and no longer pushes. Now, the video got to my absolute favorite part, the coup de grace. Well, favorite, I'm being facetious. He mentions illegal activity to support his opposition to the Me Too movement that is hurting women. He talks about a manager that hired a lesser skilled man over an attractive woman because she was pretty. The equal opportunity laws were created specifically with this behavior in mind. Then he goes on to make note of a dozen more illegal actors that have performed illegally in his presence. This situation, the Me Too movement, the managers not hiring people because they're attractive, is another instance of victim blaming. It is incumbent upon management and people in power to create environments that are safe and effective for everyone, and to ensure individuals are measured by their skills and abilities, and not because of how they're perceived. As much as it is sold in our society, beauty is still only a perception. Corporate or management is not about managing people. It's not about directing someone to do their job. The reason you hire someone is because they, pardon me, can do their job. But in life, there are always things that get in our way that make it difficult for us to continue to do our job on a regular basis. I believe it is management's responsibility to make what is necessary for an employee to be able to do their job. If you've got an employee that has a short-term medical problem, you don't get rid of the employee. If you can, you adjust the environment so that the employee can get through that medical emergency and then come back because of their skills, because of their value to the company, because of what they have contributed to the team. And it's not about just making that person do the job. And if they're not meeting expectations, that's actually on management. And I've said that before, because it's management's responsibility to make sure that they have the training, that they have all of the tools necessary to meet their goals and their objectives. And so it's not about, just directing. It is about creating an environment of success. If a person fails in a company, there is a responsibility of the person to achieve, but what did the company do to make sure that person was successful other than hire them? Did they make sure that the environment allows every person on their team to be successful? And that's a part of corporate culture. Alrighty. So there were a couple of articles that I had read in researching and putting together this show. And I'm just going to take a couple of paragraphs from that. From an article from the Washington Post. Let me get you the title of that article really quick. The title of the article from the Washington Post was "Self-Help Gurus like Tony Robbins have often stood in the way of social change." And this is just an excerpt from that article. Now, I've concluded the links to the articles and the video in the podcast description so that you can see what I used for research and what I used to put the show together. Now, from the article, Robbins' words weren't an isolated reaction to the Me Too movement. They embodied an antipathy to social movements that is central to the American self-help industry. Since the 17th century, self-improvement schemes have reliably been rooted in the belief that weak individual will, not social malaise or structural inequality, is at the heart of all problems, from poverty to extra pounds to sickness to sexual assault. It's called self-help for a reason, and taken too far, this ethos can tend towards solipsism at the expense of social change. Also, an article from the Chicago Tribune, title, Tony Robbins, your story about attractive women not getting hired is truly pathetic. So from that article, the fact that famous, powerful men have historically had carte blanche to treat others in a way they would never, under any circumstances except for themselves. Then there is a part in here, morning Dan, swing by my office later and let me tell you what that handsome suit makes me want to do to you. Oh, my wife says hi, is galling. You know what's not galling? A movement that works to both quantify it and end such behavior. Since Tarana Burke's Me Too movement gained widespread attention last fall, women and men have publicly shared brutal stories of childhood rape, workplace sexual assault, death threats, unwanted touching, so much unwanted touching, and serial harassment. So there was a lot of pushback for Tony Robbins, and I'm not saying that there is several ways to look at Tony Robbins' behavior. I believe it was a microcosm of corporate environment where force is used to achieve objectives, and fighting back is labeled as aggression and anger and emotional. Now, I don't know if Tony Robbins' behavior was hubris or ignorance or something else. Ignorance as in not knowing, not as in him not being an intelligent man. I really believe he's a very intelligent person, and he understood what he was doing and how it was coming across. But I may be wrong. When people are fighting back for relevance or safety, to tell them that their fight will not make them happy pretty much is tantamount to encouraging surrender. Now, he later apologized and said that the teacher needed to learn. For someone with his experience and knowledge, learning should have been a regular part of his actions. And rather than being dismissive of her comments and statements, he should have and could have been more reflective in the moment. That would have been much more important. With all this, I still believe Tony Robbins is a much more self-aware person than that is represented in these clips. That's going to wrap up today. And I want to thank everybody for joining me this afternoon. Alrighty. I'll be back next Saturday at 2 o'clock. Make sure you join me. All right. You can replay the video podcast here on YouTube. And the audio podcast is available on Stitcher.com, podcast.com, and the iTunes Store. Also in the Google Music Play Store. The internet is powered by your likes, shares, and comments. Like, share, and comment on this episode where you find it, because it matters. As always, be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.